the talk on DevOps and compliance by the head of IT risk and compliance at Atlassian, Guy Herbert, or as known man in the shirts, or as otherwise known as the Hugh Jackman of Atlassian, because you need somebody famous to talk compliance. So, thank you, Guy.
Cool, thanks, Vassani. Compliance is not one of the most interesting topics, I understand that, so we hired Hugh Jackman to come and present compliance to make it interesting for you. Okay, and it's really funny because I come to the US and people go, "Are you Hugh Jackman?" I go, "No, mate, I'm not." And they go, "Oh my God, you are!" No, okay, so, all right. Agile and DevOps have been around for a while. These are not new, okay? Compliance has been around for even longer. It's really not new. But more of us are using Agile and DevOps to move faster because we see the benefits. But we're not just using it in development anymore. We're seeing Agile spread across the organization. And so this is bigger than just software. But we're conflicted because there's also more compliance obligations all the time. It's not like everything's getting easier. The lawyers are having a field day. So how do we make this work together? Okay, I'm going to talk really about 3 different things. And so I'm trying to frame this. So that the first thing is, risk and compliance really needs to make this easy for you. And so I'm going to give risk and compliance people some work to do here. And you can take this back to them and go, here's something you need to do to help us. Because you've got work to do. The second one is that you need to understand the rules around risk and compliance, and particularly in Agile, where you're changing the world as you're doing things. So understanding those rules helps you understand what you can and cannot change, and risk needs to be able to communicate that to you. But risk also needs to know what you're doing. And if you have to spend a lot of time telling them what you're doing, that slows you down. And the third thing I want to talk about is how do you maintain dev speed and still meet those compliance obligations? And that's really important. Okay, because you are trying to move fast. Okay, a little bit of background. I joined Atlassian about 5.5 years ago, and I came from a large Australian bank, all right? So it was a retail bank, pretty boring. I joined Atlassian. One of the things that, at the time, we had no compliance obligations. Now, from a risk and compliance perspective, that's a pretty sweet gig. But the person who hired me said, we know that we're going to have to meet these compliance obligations, so you have to build it so that we can. But if you slow us down, you'd better find another job. The second one is that Atlassian is a do-ocracy. We want you to do things. So if you sit in the corner pontificating about, like, the frameworks and all these sort of things, you're going to stay on the sidelines. You've got to get in there and you've got to help us. And the third thing he said was, good luck with that. So I set about rethinking our compliance controls and taking all of the stuff that I hated at the other organisations so that we didn't have to do it that way. Okay. So what are our compliance obligations now? So we take credit cards, so we do PCI. Now we take a really light touch to PCI, so it's really simple for us. Some of you for that's not going to be the same. But we're a US listed organisation, so we're subject to Sarbanes-Oxley. Now most organisations don't put their products through SOX. We do. So we're quite different from other organisations in that perspective. As one of the things that we do, we have a product, so we have one of our products that releases 30 times a day, yeah, and it's subject to SOX controls. This is pretty cool. All right, we run cloud businesses, so you want to know we're not a bunch of fly-by-night cowboys, so we issue SOC 2 reports to say these are our internal controls around the trust service principles. And of course, we sell to European customers, and so we're subject to GDPR. We use ISO certifications to help us with that. All right. People have work to do. Who here works in risk and compliance? You poor things. I really sympathise. Maybe a beer afterwards would help. But for the rest of it, you have work to do. You don't wake up thinking about risk and compliance. You wake up thinking about, how am I going to deliver service to my customers? How am I going to make sure that people have the tools that they need to be able to do their work? Risk and compliance is not the thing you wake up wanting to do. All right, I'm different. I do wake up thinking about risk and compliance. So how did we do it at Atlassian? How do we take that level of overhead away from the people who are doing the work? So we thought about our compliance obligations, and we said, how do we redo this? So we took all of our risk and compliance obligations, and we said, let's map this to a set of control objectives. And we took those control objectives, and then we took those out to the teams, and we said to the teams, all right, how do you meet these control objectives? All right? Now, this is really important because we did this as a team talking to people. We did not email out the list. Okay? And that's really important. So for the risk and compliance people in the audience, do not email out the list, because all you will get is people who don't understand what you're emailing them. Okay, you're not going to get the response you want. So go out and meet with them. Twofold impact of this. One is they understand what you're really asking because you can iterate on that question in the meeting. The other thing is, the second part that's really powerful, is that you get to understand what they do. And because risk and compliance works across the organisation, you get to take the learnings from one group that's doing something really cool, really well, and you'll be able to take it across the organisation. So you improve the whole organisation. You also get to get some idea about whether they're doing the right thing or not. So, out of this, you get a control activity library. Now, in most organisations, this becomes this great monstrous beast of a thing that doesn't get maintained. All right? I have worked in organisations where there are literally thousands and thousands of these, and nobody has any idea what's in there. Don't do that, please. Okay, so what we do, that control activity is owned by the person who performs that control activity. It's their ticket. If they want to change it, they can. If they change jobs, they move on, they go and do something else. They reassign that control activity to the person that takes on that task. Okay? So there's real ownership at that level. And this is, in a risk and compliance world, that's absolutely crucial. Ownership helps you so much. All right. We don't trust anyone. That's the first rule of risk and compliance. Trust no one. So we go and check to make sure that people are doing the right thing. They're doing what they say they do. So we go and verify these controls. But this is not surprise, we gotcha, because they own the ticket, because it's theirs. They can see what they're meant to be doing all the time. If they want to see what their control activity, what compliance obligation their control activity is supporting, it's traceable through Jira. It's not, it's something over there that I can't see. They can see that at any point. The other thing is, it's not hidden in the risk and compliance tool. This is in Jira, which everybody else has got access to. So it's not off there. Okay, so all of the control testing that we do to make sure that people are doing the right thing, we capture in the tool. So it's in Jira. So that means that when the external auditors come in, we give them access to all of that testing documentation. So they can see the control activities that people are meant to be performing. They can see the results of the testing that we've done. They can use the documentation that we've already prepared. It reduces the amount of time that they spend with the people doing real work. This is really cool and really powerful. In an environment where you have internal audit, second line assurance, and all of these sort of things, external auditors often can't rely on the conclusion that the internal teams have made. So we don't make them do that. We just give them the documentation so they can reuse it. It's pretty cool. So what does it look like? This is a compliance obligation in our Jira instance. And if you want to see how we've set this up, all of the information, the workflows, the custom fields, the values for the custom fields are all in the Atlassian community. So we're happy to share all of this. This is not IP. We want you to use it. Okay, so interesting pieces on this. All right, this is a standard, so it's a compliance obligation. It's SOX. It then links to the control objective in that bottom box. And so you can see that it's linked to change management. We then have, this is the control objective. Lots of information on the page. Let's take a look at some of the things that are important. So you can see it's a control objective. You can see what it relates to. So you can see the GRC compliance space. So you can see the standards that it supports. You get a description. We try to keep these really high level. Don't go into really neat, detailed on this, because people will go, oh, that's not my control objective. You're trying to keep this high level so that you can map them through. And then you can see it's linked down to the control activity that supports that. All right, this is what a control activity looks like. Top box, lots of information about the control activity. Description, what that control is actually doing. And then, top right, you can see it's assigned to a person. So you get ownership. All right, when we go through and test it, this is what a test looks like. It describes the test. It says whether it's a pass or a fail. You can then get real-time information on what your control status looks like. This is really cool. It's really powerful for management to be able to see whether things are working or not. And we can pull all of this information onto a dashboard so that people can see it really easily. It's open. Now, sometimes this freaks people out because they're going, but we've tested something and it's failed and I don't want to tell the world. So if you're in that type of organisation, I pity you, but you can restrict it. So you can restrict this information down to say, actually, we're going to say, only give this information to a subset of people until we validate it, until we confirm it, until we've repaired it. One of the other things we do. All right. The second piece is around communication. There's three parts to this. The first one is that when you're doing change in your organisation, you need to be able to know what you can and cannot change. And we use Confluence to be able to help people understand this. We use that to be able to provide open information about the boundaries that are set and what you can change within those boundaries and what you can't change. And this is really important because it helps people, as they're doing things, to be able to go, all right, I can go there, I can get this information really easily. There are sometimes teams within your organisation who may not be as agile as other teams. Having this in place helps them communicate those rules so that other people can understand them. You also get to say who can change those boundaries if you need to change them. The second is, change needs context. Having the information about why you're making a change really helps those teams to be able to make those changes. Having that in one place, being able to share that information, helps risk and compliance as well. And because the third one is, because you're making all of these changes, you're moving quickly to try and keep the risk and compliance team aware of what you're doing It's really useful to be able to refer them to your project and to be able to say, these are the changes we are making, and you can say these are the sprints that they're coming in, so they can understand the time frame, and they can engage with you on the things that they perceive as being risky or the things that you perceive as being risky. Now, in Atlassian, we don't have a big risk and compliance team. There's 5 of us. Okay, so we're pretty light. We looked at embedding risk and compliance people into each of the teams and into each of the development environments. You can't do it. It doesn't scale. So what we did was we said we'll have risk champions, people who really care about risk within each of the teams, and we'd work with them to help them understand risk, understand what they were doing and how that related to risk. And what we do is we get them to call out in their projects the changes that they perceive as being particularly risky, and then flag those tickets. We then populate those onto a dashboard that the risk and compliance team can see. So we can see what teams perceive as risky, we can see when it's going to come up as a change, and that helps us with our engagement with those teams. So it helps us balance that really. All right. The third piece. This is the really, really cool part. Okay. How to maintain dev speed and do those 30 changes a day and still maintain your compliance obligations. Now, this is a journey that you will need to take your auditors on with you. All right? Because the auditors tend to be very old school. They go, you need to have change initiation, it needs to be signed off. You need to have change approval signed off. You need to have testing signed off. You need to have release to production signed off. If you can get them to stop thinking like that and go, what we really need to do is to make sure that all changes have been approved by someone other than the person who made the change, and that they have been successfully tested before going to production. And that's really crucial. If you can do those 2 things and get the auditors on the journey, then you can maintain dev speed. All right, a little bit of background. We have all of our code stored in Bitbucket. Well, of course we do. We're Atlassian. We sell Bitbucket. Okay. You can do that with pretty much any Git repository, all right? What we do is we allow any developer access to the code. You want to branch it? Knock yourselves out. Don't care. You want to merge that code back to master? Now I care. So what we do is we say you are not allowed to push to master. You have to create a pull request. All pull requests have to be reviewed by someone other than the person creating the pull request. Now, the great part about Bitbucket is if you create the pull request, it automatically says you can't be the person who approves the pull request. Like it's just how it works. For teams that want to have more review, and I'll talk about the difference between compliance and risk later, you can actually set up more reviewers. There are other settings that you can do in that, which is how do I make sure that it doesn't back out if somebody changes something after the peer review, etc. But that's the piece where it's really important. Okay. Now, this is really, really important, because if your peer review is crap, then you will have crap go to prod. And that's not cool. And so you need to make sure that you have good peer review within your organisation. You need to make sure that people care about change. They want to make sure that they're shipping good code. Who here has a change approval board? That's why you're in this session, right? All right. Has anybody noticed the change approval board, the first question they ask is, who else has signed this off? Yeah. A lot of the time, they don't really understand the change. They don't understand the code behind the change. And so they're looking for who else has signed this off. When you're doing a peer review, do the people doing the peer review, do they understand the code? Yeah. If they don't understand the code, then seriously, stop them doing peer review. All right? But they understand the code. They understand what the change is trying to achieve. And so they're actually a better risk control than your change approval board. And so that's why we try to get these small changes having ownership at the commit level. Now, what's the risk associated with a single commit? Is it less than the risk associated with a month's worth of changes? Generally, yes. And so we looked at what's the risk associated with small change versus large change, individual change, a lot smaller than large change. If you have a commit go to production and something goes wrong, is it easier to find what went wrong with it than a month's worth of change? Yes, it is. So being able to identify that change and rectify it is so much faster. So your risk is less. All right. So how do we do this? We use Bamboo and Bitbucket as a combination. And so what we do is we have the compliance settings in Bitbucket, which says you have to have pull requests. Pull requests have to be peer reviewed. If they're changed after the peer reviewed, it backs out. It has to be reviewed by somebody other than that. What we do is we get Bamboo to look at Bitbucket and say, are these compliance settings turned on? If the compliance settings are turned on for a repository that needs to be compliant, Bamboo will go, yes, I can now start the build process. Compliance settings not turned on for something that needs to be compliant, we don't go any further. It then runs the build tests and it says, okay, do we have green build on this? If you have green build, it will then sign the artifact, cryptographically signs the artifact. Fails the build test, you don't get an artifact. It's really simple. Once you have that signed artifact, you can store that anywhere. So it removed a whole heap of controls that we needed to have around the storage of artifacts. And who here has to manage logical access? Yeah, come on, seriously, everybody has to manage. So if you can remove a whole heap of checks around the logical access to these storage spaces, then your life becomes easier. You're less likely to fail audits. So what does this look like? Bitbucket? You can actually just check the compliance box. Say I want to have compliance checks on this repository. If you want to go in and change those or what it looks like, you can go in and say, for the master branch, I want to have everybody merge via pull request. Now, in some of the situations, we have bot accounts that are different from this, and we use it to version bump stuff. And so you may have a bot account in there, and you need to restrict access to that bot account, but that's one of the things that you end up with. But you get to see the merge checks. And this, remember how I said there was you could say the number of people that I want to have on this check, and you can say I want to have more than one person. I want to have 2 people. And when you start to get into some of this in granular detail, you can say, I want it to be a set of people. But if you start to do that, think of it more as a risk management strategy than a compliance strategy. Okay. And this is what the end result is. Branch, master, you're allowed write access. Nobody has write access to that branch. Everything has to be merged via a pull request, and this is where you end up with. One of the great parts about this is that when your auditors come through, you can show them who has reviewed all of the changes. And you can do this on every commit. Now, this helps in the transition with your auditors moving from old school to this new approach, because they do like to see ticks on pages. All right? Now, one of the things that trying to get auditors to step away from the idea of I need signed approval for change initiation is fairly difficult. But if you can do that, this is a big step to doing this. To help you understand, and I can't remember whether I've said it or not, because I say it all the time, it took us 6 meetings with our auditors to shift them from you need to have a change approval board and change initiation to being able to accept this approach. Do not think of this as I'm having a compliance discussion with my auditors. Think of this as I am selling a control. It's sales. You need to think about all of the reasons why they won't let you do this and have an answer for every one of them. The same way you go through a sales presentation, think about that. You've got to sell these controls to the auditors. There's an upside though. So, we have 60 applications that are high change and they're critical to our compliance obligations. In that environment, a traditional auditor will want a sample of 60 changes from every one of those applications every period that they're doing an audit for. It's really easy maths. It's 3,600 audit tests. So that's a lot of documentation to be able to provide to the auditors. Because we've effectively turned this into an automated control, that means that we now have one audit test. So this is really cool. I had one of the auditees, dev manager in our space, come and say, "When's the audit happening?" I said, "It's already done." He's like, "Hang on a second, I had a half-hour meeting with the auditors. Like, when's the sample testing going to hit us?" I said, "No, it's done. We're done. There's no more testing." He was like, but I used to work for a bank and we had SOX requirements." And I said, "Yes, we got SOX requirements." He goes, "But it used to be living hell." I go, "Yeah, it's not anymore." He was amazed. So, remember how I said I'd talk about the difference between risk and compliance? This is really important because being able to meet a compliance obligation, it's actually fairly easy. There are a set of rules, you follow the rules, you meet the compliance obligation. Who here, does anybody work for McDonald's? Cool, thank you. Okay. Okay. Who here has done an ISO certification? Yeah, there's a bunch of people. They're great fun. I sort of liken them to McDonald's, all right? You get consistency. Wherever you go in the world, a Big Mac is going to be the same Big Mac, all right? It's going to be crap, okay? It's not a good hamburger, okay? But it's the same everywhere you go. That's compliance. All right? Risk. The risk is it's what can go wrong. But it's also the thing that delivers you the upside. It's going to that hole in the wall burger place that gives you that amazing burger. But it's also the possibility that you go to the hole in the wall person and you get food poisoning. okay? So being able to manage your risk and know what you're doing, that's really important. So it's not just follow the rules. And that's why some of our teams go, actually, we're going to limit the number of people who can make a change. We're going to say that there has to be 2 peer reviewers and they have to come from this set of people because we're really worried about these things. And so that's risk management. But we don't tie the two together. We don't tie that to compliance because that makes a nightmare for us. All right? Don't do that. Okay. The great part, less access management. In the traditional world, you have a set of creators, a set of reviewers, a set of approvers for your change approval board, you've all got all these different groups, okay? And it's when you have to do access management for those groups, that becomes a lot more complex. And people change roles. Who here has an access role change issue from their auditors every year? Oh, seriously? I'd be really surprised if you all don't. Because people change jobs and they don't tell HR and they don't do this and they don't update AD and they've got some access to some system that who knew that they had it. So the more you can pull that up so that you don't have to do that role change stuff, it's so much easier. So what we do is we say, actually, Jira people have access to Confluence. Confluence people have access to Bitbucket. Bitbucket people have access to Trello. Like it's spread across. And so if they move between any of those organisations, I don't have a role change issue. There are groups that I do care about, and so we do manage those, and we do care about people moving from finance to development. We do care about development moving to finance. Anybody met a developer who's desperate to become an accountant? No. It's a life event. People remember this stuff. HR goes, oh my God, they're moving from where to where? Like it's really, like it happens, but not very often. And so being able to identify those, there's a real event that happens and the changes get made. Okay, there is more access management that you need to do. Okay, so you need to know who can turn off these controls. So remember how I said, you know, if the cryptographic signature, somebody can turn that off, we really care about that. Production checking to make sure that it only runs signed artifacts, we care about that. So if somebody can turn off that control, really monitor that. The other thing is that we also do monitoring of the peer review and green build settings. So if somebody changes those settings on a repo, I care about those. If somebody changes the compliance checks before build or production signature, I care about all of those. So this is not a one-step journey. Tick, tool implemented. Tick, we are done. It's a journey. You need to take people in your organisation on the journey. You need to take your auditors on the journey. And you need to be prepared for dealing with those changes. You need to change fast. The world's changing fast. You need your risk and compliance people to make it easy. As I said, in the Atlassian community, go into Atlassian community, search risk and compliance. I don't have search engine optimization, but I'm the #1 hit. We use Jira and Confluence to help our teams be able to communicate. It's a really cool tool to be able to spread this information across the organisation. The more teams that use it, the more you get that benefit. If stuff is hidden in a risk and compliance tool off in the corner, how do you know what's in there? How does anybody else know what's in there? And if you can use peer review and green build as your key controls for change management, you can have speed and compliance. Questions? Yep. Yep, cool, sorry. Yeah, coming down the front. Yep.
You had mentioned, I guess, earlier about who can turn off the controls and stuff, right? So understanding what those rules are.
Yep.
Do you have a concept of policy as code, or some ways, like, for example, the fact that, you ensure so that they could maybe review those?
So what we do is we allow people to turn off those controls. So sometimes there's an emergency, okay? And so you go, actually, I need to push this change through to production right now.
Yeah.
So we allow people to turn them off, push that change if they need to, and then turn it on, turn it back on. But what we actually enforce is that you need to turn it back on before you can push to production. So it enforces the re-enablement of that control. So you can turn it off, get your change made, push. All right? So it does actually enforce that. I might have to explain that. Okay.
I'll come over.
But we monitor for that. And so if somebody does that, we go and, all right, why did you do that? And then that ties to an incident management process. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Did it answer the question?
Sort of, but I'll come.
Sort of, okay.
I'll come.
If we can grab you after.
Yeah,
Okay.
and feel free to talk to Guy after the talk. Are you done or?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Any more questions, guys? We still have a few minutes. And actually, before we get to questions, one quick PSA. In 15 minutes at 2:50, there is actually a talk with Atlassian leadership about how we scaled our security, compliance, and trust practices, which might be quite relevant to a few of you guys. It's in Mandalay CD. We're going to have a few of our good folks there.
And if I don't answer the questions and you don't get a chance to talk to me afterwards, because I love hanging around and talking to people, even though I'm a risk and compliance person, I'm Guy at Atlassian.com.
All right, I have a question.
Yep.
I'd like to be able to sell a control where product owners and scrum masters load a sprint as a scoping activity, and that automated testing sets a flag in Jira and then moves them to done as the validation activity as a way of escaping large change control boards. How do I do that, or what's wrong with my thinking?
There's nothing wrong with your thinking. It's just that you're effectively setting yourself up with more administration than you need to from a compliance perspective. So getting the auditors to go actually commit level approval is enough to give me approval. That it removes a level of overhead. Now, you might want to do what you've described from being able to ensure that what you're delivering is what you want to deliver. You may do that to be able to manage people going off and doing development that they shouldn't be doing. But what we've generally found is that teams have a lot of work to do already. In their daily stand-ups, they're talking about what they're doing. And if the team, if the person who's managing that team, is in the stand-up and paying attention, they generally go, well, hang on a second, you're working on something that isn't what we're meant to be working on. So it tends to self-limit there. If you're working in an organisation where you've got people working on stuff that they shouldn't be working on just because they can, then that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. I think you're putting more overhead than you need to do, but you might do it from an other risk perspective.
Any other questions?
You mentioned the owners assigned to controls.
Yep.
So if I am a dev manager, I would be one of such owners responsible for the control that my team is responsible for enforcing?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So you would be, and if you changed roles, then you would assign that control to somebody else. If the control changed, you would go in and change that control. That freaked our auditors out because they were like, what do you mean you will let people just change their controls? What happens if they changed it to something that we don't agree with? I go, it's Jira, you get notified. I'll get a notification. We had all of our policies in Confluence and they were like, but anybody can change them. And we were like, yeah. If the policy needs changing, then why would it be a barrier to people doing, like, making a change? And they were like, no, that freaks us out. You've got to lock down your policies. And so they accidentally changed one of the policies because they were in there viewing it and they just didn't know what they were doing. And they changed a policy and I got a notification. And I went, guys, why'd you change the policy? And they were like, oh, you do get notified. It's like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. I'm trying to give Arseni just like, you know, I'm just putting him in different areas of the room, just getting him running.
Hi. You're speaking my world. So we're trying to do kind of what you're talking about. The auditors are actually kind of open to it, believe it or not, in our world. But we're still assuming at the end of it that the audit, instead of the teams having to build a bunch of evidence, we're trying to make the system do it for them. We're still assuming we're going to have to get that data into an auditor's hands that shows that product owner actually accepted stuff. You know, they didn't have.
And that's why
sounds
I, like
different.
being able to show the commit with the check of who reviewed it actually helps in that transition with the auditors.
Yeah, I guess what I wanted to ask is, does your audit, what does the audit look like? Do you let them into the system and they dink around and they look at these screens, or are you pulling the data out somehow?
So what we do is we show them, so they want to see repository settings just because they're like that. So we show them repository settings and they'll go through and they'll sample a few of those and go, yep, all the repository settings are where they should be. And we go, of course they are, because you can't release without the repository settings in place. And then what we do is we get them to try and push something through. And so they'll go into a repo where the compliance settings are not turned on, and they'll try and push that through the process. And it'll just go, nah, doesn't allow it. And so they're testing an automated control. And because they're testing an automated control, they can do a test of one.
Thank you so much, Guy. We're out of time, but catch Guy after the talk.
Good. Thank you very much.